BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Hello all. I would like to remind you guys that I'm also the host of the program Astro Psych 400 here on YouTube, which is the home of the podcast for sleep. Some of you were saying that you use BlackBoxOnlineRadio to help you fall asleep at night, and I thought, why not create a podcast customized just for that? Astro Psych 400 also has videos on astrology and psychology, but the podcast for sleep will be coming out every weekend. I invite you to like and subscribe. Alright, and welcome to the AMA. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Wednesday, time for the AMA. That is the Ask Me Anything, where I respond to your questions and comments. We go through the material together and we have a discussion. But first, I would like to give a shout out to Jerome, the French Wrecking Crew, for all of his promotions of this program on Facebook and Instagram. He has shared a lot of material about BBOR, and he also posted a photo recently of him holding the book Killer on a White Horse by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel murder mystery inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there's a link to that in the description box for the book Killer on a White Horse, if you're curious. And another great way to support the show is to visit the TeeSpring page, have a look at some of the merchandise, and remember, being weird is not a crime. In addition to the regular lineup of the Zodiac Mondays, the Wednesday AMA, and the Anything Goes segment on Fridays, I've also added 2 segments to Black Box Online Radio. The first is True Crime Talk Radio, and the second is the Versus series, where I talk about comparing and contrasting 2 different criminals. But yesterday on True Crime Talk Radio, I was talking about the disappearance of Andrew Gosden, and there was some breaking news in that case. 2 arrests had been made back in December, actually, but I believe the media has really just caught fire with it only in the past couple of days. However, there was another story that I was talking about on True Crime Talk Radio, and that is the case of Darlie Routier, who was convicted of murdering one of her sons from Texas, accused of murdering 2 of them, and you guys were really responding to the claims about Darlie Routier more so than anything else on the True Crime Talk Radio segment, so I thought that there should be a single episode devoted just to her story and just to this material. But I think it's important to note that the crime occurred on June 6th of 1996. There were indeed 2 victims, but as we'll see very early on, she was only convicted for one of the murders. And I was talking about the show Death Row Stories yesterday, and that's why it was on True Crime Talk Radio, where I respond to mostly creations of the media, like articles, maybe watching a TV show, listening to a podcast, whereas on the AMA I can respond to your questions and comments. And I was watching Death Row Stories, which was on HLN, and they had a very, very one-sided presentation talking about how Darlie could have been innocent. And I know that this isn't the most effective way to evaluate information, but I like to start with the most general sources possible, and what could be more general than ABC News? So I watched the ABC News special presentation on Darlie Routier, but on Murderpedia, they have something that is a little bit more bare bones. Darlie Routier was convicted of murder for a crime that occurred June 6, 1996. She was arrested on June 18th of 1996. She was born on January 4th of 1970. She was accused of stabbing 2 of her 3 children, Damon, age 5, and Devin, age 3, stabbing them with a knife in Rowlett, Texas. She was sentenced to death on February 4th of 1997. And their introduction is, Darlie Lynn Routier is an American woman from Rowlett, Texas, who was convicted of murdering her young son Damon and is currently on death row awaiting execution by lethal injection. 2 of her 3 children, Damon and Devin, were stabbed to death in the family home on June 6 of 1996. Routier was accused of killing both children, but was only prosecuted for the murder of Damon, the younger of the two murdered boys. The motive. The prosecutor's contention was that Darlie Routier murdered her sons because the family was experiencing financial difficulties. She was a full-time homemaker, and her husband, Darren, D-A-R-I-N, had a small business and earned a relatively high income. This was later referred to as living large by Darren Routier in an interview a few days after the deaths with Joe Munoz of KXAS Channel 5 in Dallas-Fort Worth. The family lived in a two-story home in a middle-class neighborhood and drove a mid-sized SUV and owned a Jaguar automobile and used a boat. Prosecutors described Routier as a pampered and materialistic woman with substantial debt, a plummeting credit line, and little money in the bank, and they feared that her middle-class lifestyle was about to end. The murder. Darlie Routier testified that an intruder killed her children, but police found inconsistencies between her report and the crime scene evidence. During the 911 call, Routier can be heard saying that she found a knife on the floor, and the 911 operator, thinking that Routier was speaking to her, told her not to touch anything, to which Routier responded that she had already touched it, picked it up, and later said, "We could have gotten the prints, maybe." Although Dr. Alejandro Santos and Dr. Patrick Dilwan referred to Routier's words as wounds, again referred to her wounds as superficial, her neck wound came within 2 millimeters of her carotid artery. Blood spatter expert Tom Bevel testified that cast-off blood found on the back of Routier's nightshirt indicated that she had raised the knife over her head as she withdrew it from each boy to stab again. I've noticed that this case, more so than a lot of other true crime programs I've covered on the channel, really ignites a debate. So many people are discussing this in the comment sections, whether it's on YouTube or on Facebook, and they're trying to just weigh the pros and cons, the interpretations of the evidence. Did she do it or not? Did Darlie Routier actually murder her children, or was she the victim of a horrible tragedy and no one believes her story in the media or law enforcement or the legal communities? She definitely does have lots of supporters, though. But our first comment comes to us from Rob S., who says, "She wasn't accused, she was convicted." So, for the purpose of this discussion, perhaps we can refer to her as a convicted woman. She was indeed put on trial, and she was sentenced to death for the murder of, again, for one of her sons, but I guess it's perhaps fair to say that she was both accused and convicted. She was accused of murdering both of her sons in this case, even though she had a third one who did appear in the Death Row Stories episode. But I think you guys can get the idea. They attributed the death of her second son to her as well. Our next comment comes to us from Christina Williams, who says, "I've always believed she was innocent. I think it's scary she's on death row. Everyone who hears the evidence has questions. So how is she on death row?" Now, absolutely I have questions, but let's look at some of the reasons why the police began to suspect Darlie Routier very early on. And it seems like every source that I've been pulling up has had some type of connection to these two pieces of evidence. The first is Darlie's story, that she was awakened sleeping on the couch, and that she saw the outline or silhouette of a man, someone wearing dark clothing, and then he actually goes away, but she runs after him because there's this intruder in her house, and she hears the sound of breaking glass, and then the altercation kicks off, and that she is stabbed multiple times, and she has cuts that appear to be consistent with defensive wounds. She is cut across her neck, and in one source there was a statement that she was wearing a necklace, and the chain from the necklace was pulled on her neck so intensely that it was actually embedded into her skin and had to be cut out, but I will address that later on. And then she had a very large bruise on her arm going from her forearm all the way to her armpit. These appear to be consistent with a defensive struggle. But the problem is that she said that she saw the intruder, then the intruder walks away, she walks after him, and then she hears the glass break. But what the authorities noted was that the blood spatter was only on the floor underneath the glass. If her story had been true that she was stabbed after the glass had broken, and this is from a wine glass that was thrown on the floor rather, then there should have been blood on top of the glass and below. And on the ABC News documentary, it may have even been an episode of 2020 or perhaps just one of their primetime specials, something like Primetime Live, but the ABC News documentary, they said that, well, it could have been contaminated by police officers going in and out. They could have messed up the crime scene. I don't know how that would ever be a possible explanation for why there isn't any blood spatter on top of the glass. Again, if there's blood beneath the glass and she was cut after the glass had already been on the floor, there should have been blood on top. So that really gave the authorities the impression that Darlie Routier had cut herself, and then she had staged the scene and then threw a glass on the floor, a wine glass that is, to make it appear like there was an intruder. Again, what would be the motive for doing this? It would be financial. There were life insurance policies taken out on the kids, and even though the Death Row Stories documentary heavily argued for her innocence, they did bring up the financial motive that would have been in question. Now, more importantly, the second piece of evidence involves a screen that was cut, and the knife that was used in that case was found to have come from inside of the home, and the knife was actually still found in the home, because a screen that was very low to the ground, actually. I mean, it really is quite odd when you look at some photos of it, about how this screen could have been used to enter the house, but I mean, all the windows in my home are much higher off the ground, so someone could have cut the screen, entered the home, and then tried to burglarize the Routiers. Darlie was awakened, and then she sees this intruder, and then the altercation took off. That was her story, more or less. But on Forensic Files, when I first learned about Darlie Routier, on the Forensic Files podcast, they talked about how pieces from the screen were found on the knife, and the knife was matched, a knife that was matched to the kitchen set, to like the butcher's block that would have contained the knives that were in the house. Like it was one of the Routier's own knives that had been used to cut the screen. So that is also a damning piece of evidence. On the 911 call that Darlie Routier made, she is absolutely hysterical. She's freaking out. She's screaming. And she even tells the 911 operator that she has touched the knife and there could have been prints left behind. People interpret this in two ways. Some people think that that is absolutely a sign of her guilt, that she said that because there's going to be evidence left behind, that there is going to be some type of explanation. She's sowing a seed of to grow a tree to tie an escape rope to. Absolutely, because that's what she needed to. She needed to provide an explanation why her prints would be on the knife. But other people simply say that if someone were in panic mode or in a time of crisis, they can't necessarily say that a person is going to behave and act in the same way all the time. And I definitely do have to find merit in both of those ideas. Somebody wrote in the comments section on YouTube on the ABC News documentary that their home was burglarized once, and while they were on the phone with the 911 operator, they said, "Oh no, I touched the doorknob. I may have messed up a chance to collect prints." And they said, "You don't know what people are going to do all the time. You don't know how people are going to respond all the time. And you can't just predict somebody's reactions, especially when someone is in a crisis and if someone were indeed cut or stabbed." Now, I was watching the Stones Unturned podcast once, and the host of that one, Thomas Henry Horn, brought up Darlie Routier. I actually appeared on his other channel, Professor Dad, over the last weekend talking to Drew Beeson and Ross from Planet X Filmworks, and Ross said that there was something that I had shared on BBOR, not about Darlie Routier, but about the Zodiac Killer, and he said that it was his favorite observation that I had revealed to you guys, and that was about the Zodiac Phantom Killer connection. And I promise you, this is relevant. In 1946, there was a string of murders in Texarkana that are known as the Moonlight Murders committed by the Phantom Killer. And that occurred in 1946. The Zodiac Killer first announced his name to the world in 1969. And I said at first I thought that it was so ridiculous, but then I noticed that, 1946 to 1969, that is only 23 years. So if somebody were 20 years old in 1946, then in 1969 they would be 43. Mathematically, the age works out that that could be the same killer. I don't believe that theory, but I mean, mathematically, it is not impossible that the Phantom Killer and the Zodiac Killer are the same person. And Ross said that he thought that was the best line that I had ever shared on Black Box Online Radio. Perhaps the best line that I ever heard on the Stones Unturned podcast from Thomas Horn was about the Darlie Routier case. And that is that you cannot tell if someone is lying based on their tone of voice. And they're talking about this all the time on the ABC News documentary. You listen to Darlie Routier freaking out on the 911 call, panicking, hysterical, and crying. And she's not a professional actress. As it said very clearly on Murderpedia, she was a full-time homemaker. He said you can't tell if someone is lying by their tone of voice. The only way you can tell is if you compare what they are saying to a fact-based narrative of what you already know. I mean, I think that that's absolutely on point. I mean, how would you explain the issue with the glass or the issue with the screen? But there was an article that I read on True Crime Talk Radio about the case that was from darliefacts.com, and we have a comment that came to us from T. Sully, who said, "The only way to learn the Darlie Routier case is to read the transcripts and appeals. The defense and the family have polluted the media with misinformation they keep repeating. This presentation repeats some misinformation," I guess referring to True Crime Talk Radio, but as I've said 100 million times on Black Box Online Radio, on this channel, I share my journey with you guys through the true crime world about how I learn about this stuff. And firstly, yes, I watched something like Death Row Stories, and I talked about it for 10 minutes on True Crime Talk Radio, and then going to watch the ABC News documentary. Then the more you try to learn, then you can go to the transcripts, because it's just that I share my journey with you. This is how I'm exploring the material. So I am always open to correction, and I'm always open to reading your questions and comments. And if you have anything to say about the Darlie Routier case or any of the other true crime cases that I talk about on Black Box Online Radio, whether it's the Zodiac Killer or the Phantom Killer, you can put your ideas on the comment section down below, and maybe they will be used in one of the AMAs. And the first point that T. Sully responds to is, "Darlie's necklace wasn't embedded in her neck, and it came off when the technicians removed her dressing in the ER. Read RN Jody Fitz testimony. He witnessed it." RN meaning registered nurse. And the next one was, "The bruising on her right arm, according to the testimony of all medical personnel that treated her, wasn't present during her hospital stay, nor was the redness, nor the swelling, or did she complain of pain in that area. It was found that the bruising was fresh, 24 to 48 hours old, and being that it was photographed on the 10th of June, it can't be connected to the crime on June 6 of 1996. Darlie Facts, which is the website that I was reading from last time, is run by Darlie's defense and appellate team, and any commentary they put forward there was decided long ago. There remains no evidence of any intruder. All blood, fingerprints, DNA, footprints have all been accounted for, and no evidence to directly connect Darren to the murders. Overwhelming evidence against Darlie, including her many lies. She's 100% guilty." Okay, for starters, I had always thought that she was guilty. I had learned about her case from an episode of Forensic Files, and in all seriousness, Forensic Files would be an example of a true crime program that takes strong stances. They heavily say that, okay, based on the forensic interpretations of the evidence, this person is most likely guilty. I didn't even know that there was such a large movement to talk about how Darlie Routier could be innocent, but no, I don't think that any of that suggests that she was innocent. And when someone has a bruise that is unaccounted for, or they have some type of issue about was the necklace actually embedded in her neck or not, those aren't even the most important questions. The question is, who actually killed those children? And for starters, on one of the comment section threads, and I know reading other people's comments from other channels on YouTube that aren't mine is perhaps not the most powerful form of investigation, but somebody said that Darlie Routier was given a polygraph by her own defense team, and she failed. And on Death Row Stories, Darren, her husband, was given a polygraph, and he passed. Now, some of you might not put a lot of weight in polygraphs and lie detectors, but I do. I actually believe that they're much more accurate than people give them credit for. So, I mean, Steve Wilkos said it the best because his show talks a lot about lie detectors. If it gives you the answer that you want, people will say that it's credible. If it doesn't give you the answer that you want, then people are going to say that, oh, it's not accurate. I mean, so people will try to use it for whatever type of purpose they're trying to run. But as far as there's no evidence, there remains no evidence of any intruder. All blood, fingerprints, DNA, and footprints have been accounted for. On both ABC News and Headline News, they proposed that there was a possible fingerprint and a possible footprint that were unaccounted for. And both of these shows also talked about how there was a bloody sock that was found 75 yards from the Routier house. And it had the blood of the two children on it, both of them, and it's just found in an alleyway 75 yards from the house. And they're like, it would be so implausible for somebody to stage a crime scene, run 75 yards, and then run back another 75 yards. That's a football field and a half, when they could have thrown it in the backyard, they could have thrown it in the driveway, they could have thrown it anywhere. If Darlie Routier had actually staged the scene, that suggested that someone was trying to run away, and that they realized that they had the bloody sock somehow stuck to their clothing, or maybe like caught on their pocket or something, and then they just threw it out the window, or if they were walking, then they threw it to the side. All right, you following me? I was not impressed by any of that. I was like, well, why would somebody go to that length to stage a scene? Because they wanted to confuse the authorities. That is the whole point. I mean, I think that is the whole point in this case, that someone is trying to commit this crime in this particular way because they want to confuse the authorities. So, I mean, that's not a very convincing explanation. I was rather disappointed, though, with one aspect of the ABC News documentary when they talked about how if there had been an intruder in the Routier home, then they would have left footprints in the mulch bed that was right outside of the window upon exiting. But very clearly you could see from the photos that the Routiers had concrete underneath the screen that was cut, again almost at the ground level, but they didn't have mulch for at least 5 or 6 feet away, and Darren Routier addressed this very clearly, saying about how it's implausible. He even did his own reenactment video showing that you can enter the house or exit the house through that window without stepping in any mulch. I just thought that that was rather silly on their part. And our next comment comes to us from Mama Deuce, who says, I've always thought that Tommy Lynn Sells could have been responsible for killing Darlie's boys and hurting her. This is so similar to his M.O. Now, we have a comment from T. Sully, who responded to Mama Deuce saying Sells was in prison when Darlie murdered her boys. Now, I had never heard of Tommy Lynn Sells before, so I wanted to read a little bit more, and I got over to on the website called clarkprosecutor.org, and let's hear more about this. Tommy Lynn Sells was an American serial killer who was executed on April 3rd of 2014, and he committed 22 murders in the minds of the authorities. He was only convicted for one of the murders, for which he received the death penalty and was eventually executed. Now, lawyers will do this all the time, prosecutors will do this, and even with the case of Darlie Routier, you heard that she was only convicted for one of the murders, not two, even though there was very clearly a double homicide, which they believe was committed by the same perpetrator. But it happens all the time, especially with somebody like a serial killer. Another prime example of this is the serial killer John Aykroyd, who is featured in the documentary Ghosts of Highway 20. He committed, we don't even know how many crimes, but he was only convicted of one murder, and that was the murder of Kay Turner. So it appears with Tommy Lynn Sells, something very similar happened. So to read a little bit more, police investigators believe Sells murdered at least 22 people. Retired Texas Ranger John Allen said, we did confirm 22. I know there's more. I know there's a lot more. Obviously, we will never know a definite number of crimes committed by Sells. Sells said he committed his first murder at age 15 after breaking into a house. While in the house, Sells claimed to have discovered a man performing fellatio on a boy and killed the man in a fit of rage. Well, I don't know if that's true or false, but it is very normal for serial killers to commit their first crime in somewhat of an unplanned way, and then they they get addicted to the adrenaline or the excitement or the intense feelings that came with killing a person, and they want to keep doing it. But also the fact that they think that they are so powerful that they can commit crimes like that, murder, even if he thought he was doing a good thing by rescuing a boy or something. They, it is a sense of power tripping. They believe that they are so powerful that they can commit actions like that and not get caught. In July of 1985, 21-year-old Sells worked at a Forsyth, Missouri carnival where he met 28-year-old Ena Court. E-N-A is the first name, Court, C-O-R-D-T, and her 4-year-old son, Rory. Court invited Sells to her home that evening, and according to Sells, he had sex with her, fell asleep, and woke to find her stealing from his backpack. He proceeded to beat Court to death with her son's baseball bat. He then murdered her son because the child was a potential witness. The bludgeoned bodies were found 3 days later, by which time Sells had left town. Sells is linked to the 1987 murder of Suzanne Coors, the murders of 4 members of the Dardine family in 1987, the murder of Melissa Tremblay in 1988, the murder of a co-worker in Texas in 1989, the 1997 murder of 10-year-old Joel Kirkpatrick, and the 1997 murder of Stephanie Mahaney. Did you notice, though, that there is a very big gap, though, in his activities from 1989 to 1997, and his crimes go all the way up until 1999. But there is a section even on Wikipedia about his arrests and convictions, so let's have a look at that. On December 31st of 1999 in Guajira Bay, subdivision of Del Rio, Texas, Sells sexually assaulted, stabbed, and killed 13-year-old Katie Harris before slitting her throat. Absolutely horrible. But there is a different timeline for Tommy Lynn Sells on criminalminds.fandom.com. It is saying that he committed crimes well after 1989, but into 1991 in the murders of Teresa and Tiffany Hall, 1992 in Charleston, West Virginia, he stabbed Fabian Witherspoon, but then he was sentenced to serve at least 2 years in prison and was incarcerated until 1997. Did you notice, though, that, it seems like T. Sully is correct in that case, that Tommy Lynn Sells was incarcerated and behind bars at the time of the Routier murder, so I think that he should most likely be eliminated, and most other sources do not talk about how Tommy Lynn Sells is a genuine suspect in the Darlie Routier case. However, things like this do happen because I'm always tempted to bring up comparisons to O.J. Simpson, and with the Routier case, there's a double homicide, a stabbing, and in the O.J. Simpson case, for the longest time, people thought that O.J. was just guilty, and that was it. Then there was this alternative theory that the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman were actually committed by his oldest son, Jason Simpson, and then another theory emerged that they were actually murdered by the serial killer Glenn Rogers, who was known as the Casanova Killer. And I'm noticing an even bigger parallel than just these alternative theories. It's the fact that people simply can't let this go. They can't let it go. And what would be the reasons for that? I think that it's because some people just can't comprehend about how a woman could have done this to her children purely for financial gain. But I don't think that's a sufficient explanation. Crazier things have happened, absolutely. But more importantly, I'm also reminded of the Chris Watts case where somebody committed a very similar crime, murdering his 2 daughters as well as his wife Shanann Watts, so that he could be in a relationship with another person. They were experiencing financial trouble. I think a big difference with the Chris Watts case is, I'm not a mind reader, but I expect that he was thinking something to the effect of, life is never going to be good for my children or my wife. The only way that there can be any type of solution is to remove them from the picture. Absolutely horrible, absolutely disgusting. That is demented type of thinking. But that's just trying to unravel the thinking of a madman for a certain extent. But notice we use the term madman and not mad woman. Some people just simply do not believe that Darlie Routier was capable of this, and her family members are featured in both of the documentaries that I've been citing, and they're talking about how there are just no signs of mental illness, there are no signs of any type of destructive behavior. I do not believe that, because as someone who's followed a lot of true crime cases and talked about them here on Black Box Online Radio, I think that there are so many times when someone says, no, we could have never seen this coming. There were never any warning signs. And then the more they talk about the person, you learn that there were warning signs, or this person is just doing bizarre behavior, very odd types of actions, or maybe they're actually setting people up for dangerous things. And it's also possible that Darren Routier as well as Darlie were involved in a different type of insurance fraud scheme, those types of warning signs. Now, does that actually mean that someone murdered their child? Well, at the end of ABC News' presentation, which actually features Dan Abrams, nonetheless the legal analyst who's gone on to several other things, they're talking about how Darlie's wounds, no matter what they are, no matter when they happen, they are very much cut across her body. Like the neck wound was 2 millimeters from killing her. If it had gone 2 millimeters deeper, then that would have killed her. Again, if this is true, I mean, the media just says whatever they want. But the wounds are going across her body in a very strong cutting motion, whereas when the children were stabbed, they were stabbed from above, and the knife is plunging into the victims, and it's very, very much more likely to have been a lethal wound. And they were saying that that was an interpretation of the evidence, meaning that Darlie inflicted the wounds upon herself, and that she stabbed the children in a way that was more likely to certify the fatalities. Absolutely horrible. No matter what, and rest in peace to her children. And there's a lot more that we could talk about in the Darlie Routier case, but I would just like to turn it over to you guys for now. What do you think about Darlie Routier and any of the stories that we have shared here, or about any of the alternative possibilities? You can say whatever you want in the comment section down below. I would love to read your messages, and perhaps they will be featured in a future AMA where I respond to your questions and comments. As always, you can visit AstroPsych400 on YouTube. You can follow me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. And I will see you on Instagram, BlackBoxNet88 over on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.